I am Linda Wookey. I am the director at Burnham and Weston Energy, CIC. We're a local community energy organisation. We've got a solar farm which we use to generate power, and the profit that we make of selling that power back into the grid, we use for our community benefit fund. So we support local community-led projects as well. And just say, if you're interested in that, we are wanting to take a different approach to our community benefit fund and involve much more wider discussion about what we could be supporting in the local community across Sedgemoor, but also across Weston-super-Mare as well, which is also within our geographical area that we support. If you're interested in taking part in these conversations or interested in finding out more about the community benefit fund, do let us know. Happy for you to drop a message in the chat. Or contact us at our email address, and I'll share that in a bit. Today's really exciting. We're really pleased to be working with the University of Exeter and also with Sedgemoor District Council to have this opportunity to look at what COP26 means for us locally. As we know, we saw the Conference of the Parties, the 26th meeting of COP, so COP26, taking place in Glasgow not too long ago, with a global meeting bringing leaders from across the world to look at what we should be doing to address climate change, which is great and very and something we were looking at very closely, but also looking and considering how this actually impacts us locally. What opportunities are coming out of this? What opportunities aren't coming out of that, and what else should we be looking at locally? So really do appreciate your input today to see where we can take what COP26 has delivered for us forwards. As Peter said, later in the session, we will have some breakout opportunities to discuss this further. So first of all, we'll hear from the panel, and they will look at, share with us the strategies and actions that they've been working on so far, and also how they see COP26 has actually impacted them and what they can, and what that's given them pause for thought for across Sedgemoor. We'll also then come to you through the breakout discussions to look at what you think COP26 has delivered for you locally, and what that might mean and what you could take forward. So we're going to split those breakout rooms into 3 subjects. One is a business focused one. We're going to look at opportunities for businesses. The second will be on opportunities and funding shortfalls for local projects. And the third will be on local climate adaptation impacts. I thought I'd share that with you now, because you all have a choice to go into whichever breakout room that you would like. So I think I'll plant that seed in your head, so you just get a chance to mull it over as you meet the panel and hear what they've got to say, and also consider your own interests as well and what you would like to get out of the event. So with no more ado, please let's go to Peter. I'll hand back to you, Peter. We're going to look at the outcomes and trends from COP26.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Linda. So yes, I've got the unenviable task of trying to make sense of what happened at COP. So this, I'm going to talk through a presentation for about 20 minutes, and hopefully have a little bit of time for Q&A afterwards. But do please put questions or comments in the chat. So what I'm going to talk through is my perspective from having been there, but also from a lot of work I've done reading afterwards at different perspectives on what came out of it. And I'm going to focus on the things that I think are useful at a local level. So it's a subjective interpretation. Again, I'd really welcome other perspectives, so do share them in the chat. I won't be able to see them as I'm going through my presentation, but I will come to them afterwards. And any I don't have time to answer, I'll try and talk through while we're listening to the panel. So I'm just going to share my screen. So what I'm going to talk about is what happened at COP26, as it says, Conference of the Parties. But I'm not just going to talk about that. I'm also going to talk about the UK's net zero strategy. So this was the first comprehensive plan that UK government has done on how it's going to halve emissions by 2030 and eliminate them by 2050. And this was announced just before COP and formed part of the UK's official kind of presentation to that more international conference. Now, in terms of what happened at COP itself, there are a few key messages that have come out of that, and I want to touch on those now. Those aren't going to be the basis of what I'm going to talk about. So one of those was this idea of keeping 1.5 alive, which was kind of a key message that came out of what was talked about. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that might mean in practice. There was a whole series of pledges around methane, deforestation, coal, finance. I'm not going to touch on those too much, partly because they are just pledges, they're not actions yet. Time will tell what happens on those, and partly because they don't yet have a really significant impact at a local level. But one other thing I think is important to mention at the start is that one of the reasons that COP26 had such a big presence was not just because it was here in our backyard in the UK, but also because it was the first COP, which they happen annually, since Paris in 2015, where countries were expected to bring their targets of how they're going to get closer to that 1.5 degree target, to their carbon neutral targets. These targets called nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. This was quite a big thing that came out of it. And the plan was for these to happen every 5 years. So this was the first one, due to happen last year, delayed by COVID. So 6 years after Paris, this was the first time that these were being reviewed. And now the plan is, rather than them being reviewed in 5 years again, because they weren't close enough to where we need to be, there's a request for those to be addressed again next year. So that's a significant outcome that came out of COP. But what I want to focus on is a few key ideas that I think are important for businesses, for local authorities, for communities. And one of them is this idea of 1.5 degrees, which I'm going to talk about briefly. This is a really good graph from the organization Carbon Brief. I'll share a link to this in the follow-up email. But effectively what this is showing is how the various commitments made by governments around the world are getting us closer and closer to this target of 1.5 degrees. And then on the right-hand side, those commitments plus various net zero promises that have been made. So last year, before COP this year, and then at COP this year. And as you can see, the closest, the most optimistic we've got here is on the right-hand side, a 1.8 degree. So this is what, if all of the targets and all of the promises that have been set are met, that's likely to be where we'll get to. And there's two things I want to say about this 1.5 degree thing. Firstly, with the now annual nationally determined contributions, we're going to hear a lot more about 1.5 going forward. And it's already a very familiar term, but it's going to be more and more. And we have to be conscious that this is not a safety net. This is not a good outcome. This is not a target. This is somewhere where anything beyond this, the scientific consensus says that the impacts are going to be hugely significant. But that doesn't mean that 1.5 degrees isn't going to bring large changes. We're at about 1.1 at the moment, and we're already seeing significant impacts, not just around the world, but also in our own country. So important to keep that in mind. And secondly, that these targets are based on the best data and the best science that we have, but there's a lot of uncertainty within that. We don't exactly know what's happened, what is happening, or what is going to happen. So even the prediction for 1.8 degrees on the right-hand side, the scientific consensus suggests that could in reality be anything from 1.5 to 2.4. So 1.5 is useful, but it's really important that we don't fall back on that as a safety net and as a guarantee of anything in particular. So I want to talk about the bigger picture here. So understanding what happened from COP, one way we can do that is to think about, well, what's happened since previous COPs? Because the change doesn't happen immediately, it happens over time. And it's really useful to think about, well, what has happened since Paris in 2015, 6 years ago? And there's been a lot, and this can't all be attributed to COP itself by any stretch, but it's useful to reflect on how far we've come. There's been a real innovation in clean technology. We've had more political resilience towards climate emergency response. This idea of 1.5 degrees was normalized there. The idea of net zero, which feels quite ubiquitous now, again, was normalized at Paris. That has happened since then. We've had a shift towards clean energy and institutional change in businesses, in local authorities, in national government. And this hasn't been enough. but there has been significant change, and I think that bigger picture is helpful. Another part of it, and certainly I see from an academic perspective, is there's been really increased acceptance of the science. At COP24, 3 years ago, 2018, there was a real effort to keep the IPCC's 1.5 degree report out of the official documentation of COP. But this year in Glasgow, it was front and center in the Glasgow Agreement. And this is reflected by the academics I was at COP with, that there is a much higher increased acceptance of the science. And this is really, really significant. And lastly, on bigger picture, fossil fuels, there's a lot of talk about fossil fuels being toxic assets now, especially coal. There's a couple of quotations here, one from Jennifer Morgan, the era of coal is ending, and one from the UK government's own press release, the end of coal is in sight. Now, obviously, there's a big difference between those words and those things actually happening. But again, it's a significant step that hasn't been taken before. And these are the bigger picture things we need to keep in mind. Now, moving into specifics, behavioural trends is a really important part of what's happened at COP. And one of those trends is around behaviour change. So in the language around COP and in the UK's net zero strategy, the UK government is starting to use language like this around behaviour change. So they want to go with the grain of existing behaviour and trends. Expecting the British public to forego holidays abroad would be an enormous political challenge. What we're seeing here is effectively a delegation of responsibility of behaviour change. So this is not something that national government particularly wants to enforce. They would like to see that transition occur in quite a painless way. But we know that the transition to the world that we need to address the climate emergency isn't going to be painless in every way. We are going to have to make sacrifices. There's going to be a lot of benefits as well, but there are going to be changes. And so this behaviour change really needs to happen. But what we're seeing now is that the responsibility for that falling largely at a local level, to local authorities, to businesses, to community groups, because this behaviour change is needed, but we don't yet have a national strategic approach to what that looks like. And it is complex. So this is some data, recent data taken from some Guardian analysis looking at what people would be willing to do. And so there's here 46% of people say, I don't really think I need to change my habits. So there's a barrier there. There's a lot of people who say, I need guidance, I need support, I need resources. But significantly, this top bar, if you can't read it, it says 76% of people say, I would accept stricter rules and environmental regulations. So that's an overwhelming approval for the kind of behavior change that is almost enforced upon us. By changing what we're allowed to do. But that's the very behavior change that we're not likely to see at the moment from a national perspective. So it's really important to kind of to think about what is our role within behavior change, what can we do? Another important part of the behavioral change is how climate change is framed from a global perspective. And this largely comes down to who are we blaming for what's going wrong? Is it China? Is it India? A lot of the newspaper headlines around COP talked about apportioning blame. The Sun's talking about China, Russia, and India. In the Guardian, Alex Sharma's quoted as talking about India and China. And these frames of blame are really, really deeply unhelpful and don't really stand up to scrutiny. Every country has its own particular barriers in reaching its targets. India, for example, is trying to achieve this at the same time as dealing with fairly crippling levels of poverty in its own country, which certainly has an impact on what it is able to achieve. And a lot of the challenges around corporations which exist across borders, but also thinking about China, for example, we export a lot of our emissions over there, and they produce a lot of the things that we buy over in this country. So it's not as simple as that, but this is a very dominant idea. This is and it's not a new one. This is a cartoon from a US newspaper from 2015, effectively blaming India for disrupting the Paris Climate Summit. And my point here is really, A, this is unhelpful and inaccurate, but also we are likely to see, as climate change becomes more conscious for people, get more angry about it, there might well be more instances of particular types of racism around climate change, blame for particular countries, particular cultures. And this is something that we need to be aware of from a social perspective and make sure that we don't fall into those traps as well. Next up, climate adaptation. So this is a really important part of our response that wasn't really hugely represented at COP. There was some talk and some finance for adaptation in terms of how we respond to the climatic changes we're already locked into for the global south, for countries that are already experiencing significant impacts, but very little about what's going to happen here in our country, and certainly very little in the net zero strategy, which is focused more on mitigation rather than adaptation. But we know more and more about what the changes are likely to be. So this is a map from a climate centre looking at the land projected to be below the annual flood level by 2050. So this is looking at the red area is the area that's likely to be below the flood level. So you can see the impacts that we are predicting. It's not an exact science, we don't know for sure, but we're getting better and better from a scientific perspective, understanding what the impacts are likely to be and what we can do about them. It's not just about sea level rises. These are some graphs from some work that we've done at the university with Cornwall. So I don't have this data for Sedgemoor, but I've taken it from a North Cornwall area, which I think has a potentially similar climate. And this is looking at the maximum temperature. So we can see that over the decades, the maximum temperature is going to increase, which will have impacts on heat waves, on health, on all kinds of aspects of our lives. And secondly, for rainfall, what the trend we're seeing here is for wetter winters and drier summers, which will have impacts on lots of things, including how we travel, agriculture, how we grow food, for example. So we're getting better and better understanding what the future is going to look like from a climate perspective. And what we need to do is tie that up with our strategies, our policies, our actions, our business plans to make ourselves more resilient. We have the data, we need to make the plans. So next up, I want to talk briefly about business incentives, because I think there's a couple of really interesting trends that we can notice from COP. One is around measurement and disclosure. So this is, what are you doing as a business and what have you done? We're seeing a real trend towards businesses disclosing their emissions. This is just from one particular organization, the New Climate Institute, looking at the percentage of or the number of businesses that are disclosing their emissions. This trend is echoed across the board. It's more and more businesses are doing it. It's getting easier and easier to do, but also we're seeing those who aren't doing it run the risk of starting to be left behind. So what we need to ask ourselves is, okay, at a local level in Sedgemoor, do we have the capacity for businesses to start doing this? Do they have the support available? Are there kind of local consultancy organizations that can support? Is there in-house expertise? Do we have the tools and the resources to support businesses to be doing this, and to recognize and celebrate the businesses that are already doing it, because this is going to become more and more important. Secondly, in terms of incentives, with all of the changes around talking about where fossil fuels are going, the commitments to clean energy, all of the language, the significant language that is being used, we're seeing a real de-risking of the investment in sustainable behaviours for businesses. This is a quote from the very large consultancy firm McKinsey. Momentum has shifted towards net zero, providing businesses with a new organising principle. So what they're effectively saying as a result of COP is that it's getting more and more easy and less risky for businesses to really commit to this idea of net zero. It's still difficult. There's still challenges for businesses to take that step, but it's getting easier and easier. So what kind of leadership do we need locally to support that and recognise that? Last sort of general thing I want to talk about is these sector-specific indicators. So this is looking at, well, what are we seeing in specific sectors? And I'm not going to dwell on this too much, because I think a lot of this information is out there already, and I'll share more details. But I think it's helpful just to get a brief look. So firstly, going to look at the Glasgow Breakthroughs. So this is a series of commitments that were brought to COP that were signed by 40 countries, including the UK, the US, India, Australia, China, looking at 5 different areas: so power, road transport, steel, hydrogen, and agriculture. And what we're seeing there is not really clear roadmaps of how we're going to get to various places, but some kind of clear direction of travel, looking towards 2030. This is the kind of world that we are expecting to get towards. So again, the invitation for businesses, for councils, for communities is where do I see myself within that? How will that impact me? And how do I make sure I'm kind of pointed in that direction? Looking at the net zero strategy, however, so this is what the UK government is saying is going to happen in our country. It's interesting to note where there's more specificity and where there's a bit more vagueness. So I've just taken 3 sectors as an example that match those above. So for agriculture, a significant part of emissions, but also a significant potential solution in terms of the carbon sequestration potential. We still don't have a clear and credible strategy to address emissions from agriculture. There's still a big gap there. Power, on the other hand, thinking about energy, it's really clear that we're working towards decarbonisation by 2035 and getting rid of fossil fuels. That comes up again and again. It's a really clear commitment and target. And then thirdly, looking at road transport, you may well have heard about the plans for ending the sale of cars that use fossil fuels and vans by 2030, and there's more clarity there on the support available, the grants, the infrastructure of how that's actually going to work. So it's easier for organisations to kind of commit to that and understand that. But we don't yet know what's going to happen with things like HGVs, coaches, larger vehicles, or motorbikes, which are obviously a significant part of that as well. So some things we have a kind of a clear sense of, and some things still feel quite unclear, but that will change over time. So there's a lot of information I've just given you, and I'll obviously share the slides later, and I'd welcome any questions. But I'm just going to summarise. These are the things that I think it's really useful for us to take away from COP, regardless of who we are, what perspective we've got. So first up, we do really need to focus on what has happened and kind of own that and recognise that, not to celebrate it and say it was enough, it was great, but to use it to accelerate forward, because we do really need to accelerate. We need to move a lot faster. We need to use what has happened, understand what has happened in order to do that. But the good thing about acceleration is it doesn't have to happen in a straight line. And really, we're getting more and more examples of how change doesn't necessarily happen in a linear way. Things don't happen kind of in an equal rate. We're doing some interesting research at the university about positive tipping points, which again I'll share some information about, which is really looking at, well, how does positive change happen when the conditions are created in the right way? So not a lot happens at first, and then suddenly the conditions are right and change can happen immediately, potentially overnight. I think this is a really useful way to think about how change can happen and how we can create the right conditions for that. So it might be about businesses. It might be about supporting businesses to be able to respond to the opportunities that we know are coming down the line around clean energy and around adaptation, so that they can quickly respond when those opportunities come up. We really need to focus on behaviour change, whether we're talking about residents, customers, staff members. This is really significant, and currently the responsibility for that is kind of falling to us at a local level. And then thirdly on that, we need to find that line in the sand. So for example, fossil fuels as a toxic asset, this is a phrase that's being repeated again and again, and we need to draw a line in the sand there and say, okay, we're not going to go behind that, but keep pushing that line in the sand forward. That's what we need to do. Check in where are we, and let's make sure we don't drop behind that. Thirdly, climate adaptation and mitigation, both really important. So mitigation is the reducing our impact, cutting our emissions, but climate adaptation is the how do we prepare for the change that's already coming. And we're starting to have a different relationship with this idea of resilience and what risk might mean. Fourth, I think there's a real opportunity here as there's delay from a kind of a national leadership level. There's more and more academics who are wanting to work with people who are actually doing stuff on the ground. So it might be communities, it might be local councils, it might be businesses. This is a real resource. And I don't just mean the University of Exeter, I'm also talking about academic institutions across the country, across the world. That's a great resource to tap into. And then lastly, this is the kind of the key thing: change is happening. So however you feel about what happened at COP, change is happening. It's not enough, but it is happening, and we need to recognize that, and we need to act now as though the next changes that are coming are inevitable, because they are inevitable. We just haven't quite got to the point where the political will has matched up to the technological opportunity and the scientific knowledge. But these moments are coming. And so the more we can prepare for them and look forward, rather than just looking at what's happening here and now, the better prepared we are going to be for that. Because we are now living in a post-COP26 world. That doesn't necessarily mean a lot right now, but it is something we will be able to look back on and notice how these changes were continuing.
So what we'll do now then is that, thanks very much for that, Peter. That was really, really useful insight as to and an urge really for the change that's coming and what we must do next. We'll now move to the panel. I'd like to introduce you to a very wide-ranging, diverse panel. Really excited to have everyone with us today. We've asked them to speak to the work that they've been involved in so far from their organisation's perspective and what's been done to date, the outcomes of COP26 and which ones feel most important to them at this local level, and the gaps in our knowledge and capacity to address those which are important. So we're going to hear their perspectives. I'd like to introduce first Christy Blackwell, please, to come forward. Now, Christy is the Strategy Manager for Climate Change at Sedgemoor District Council. Each panel member has 5 minutes to give their views and their overview to us. We will run through the panel one by one. If we've got time at the end, then we'll open the floor for some clarification questions. If we don't, or you feel more happier putting your questions in the chat, then please do that and we'll pick up those questions throughout the rest of the event. Christy, over to you, please.
Thanks, Linda. Hello, everyone. So as introduced, I'm Christy Blackwell and I'm the Strategic Manager for Community Resilience and Climate Change at Sedgemoor District Council. It's really great to see so many of you here today. Thanks for coming along to the webinar, and I hope we can all have some takeaways from this morning. So excited to get into the work a little bit later. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of where we are as an organisation with our climate emergency ambitions, and follow this with a focus on where we can act on the outcomes of the COP26 conference at a local level. So our council is one of 300 local authorities in the UK to have recognised or declared a climate emergency. In 2019, we joined with the 4 other councils in Somerset to approve a county-wide climate emergency strategy, and that strategy is called Towards a Climate Resilient Somerset. It's available to view on any of the local authority websites across the county, and I'd encourage you to take a look after today if you can. The strategy's got 3 very clear goals. The first being to decarbonise local authorities, the wider public sector estates, and to reduce our carbon footprint. So by this we mean the buildings that we own as a local authority, the materials that we use, and the way we might travel to work and in the course of our work. The second goal is to work towards making Somerset a climate neutral county by 2030. And the third is to have a Somerset which is prepared for and resilient to the impacts of climate change. These are all very rightly very ambitious goals. In order to develop the strategy, we undertook to understand where Somerset's carbon emissions are generated, and this in turn identified 9 sectors which can have a major impact on our ambition to become carbon neutral. Those sectors include issues such as transport, buildings, waste and water, to name a few. We're collectively working across the council with our partners, stakeholders and communities on an action plan which has 63 outcomes spread across those 9 workstream areas, so it's huge. For your interest, the transport sector accounts for 46% of carbon emissions in Somerset, followed by industry, which accounts for 25%, and housing, which accounts for 24%. To follow on from the county-wide strategy work that we did, in February 2020, Sedgemoor District Council approved its own climate emergency strategy and action plan, which identified further areas of activity to work towards that carbon neutral goal. Again, our strategy is available to view on our website. And recently, we've joined in partnership with Somerset West and Taunton Council to pool our resources and gain economies of scale in the delivery of our project work. I'm really pleased that some of our colleagues from the partnership have joined us today at this webinar. The types of projects that we're developing together are electric vehicle charging points in our car parks, water refill stations in our communities, and tree planting across the district. So in terms of the outcomes of COP26 and the issues raised in Peter's presentation, I'd like to focus on the Council's role as a community leader in influencing and enabling behaviour change. We have a fundamental role in leading the way, for example, in encouraging and enabling our own staff to make greener travel choices when coming to work, through the decarbonisation of our buildings using greener energy and heat sources, and through investing in our electric fleet, such as our road sweepers in the Clean Surroundings Department, and having electric vehicles available for our staff to use during the working day. We must work together with our businesses, partners and communities to maximise opportunities for positive change, and we must inspire our communities to act and thrive, encouraging and enabling sustainable choices such as active travel by way of improved public transport and cycling and walking options, through increased availability of locally grown food or more market choices of local renewable energy sources, and greater ability to recycle materials where reduce and reuse is not possible. The benefits that this activity will bring to our physical and mental health and well-being are clear, with reductions in fuel poverty, improved local air quality, increased use of green spaces and increases in employment opportunities. We have a role as a local leader to promote and encourage and to facilitate that opportunity to come together with businesses, communities and residents to make informed choices about the way that we live in a climate crisis. We have a duty to highlight the impacts of climate change, not only on a global and a national scale, but how it affects our neighbourhoods and our communities. And it's for us to all build resilience through positive action, adaptation and mitigation. But I must of course mention that as a council, we're entering into a period of significant change as our county structure becomes unitary in 2023, meaning that Sedgemoor District Council will, along with the other 4 councils in Somerset, cease to exist. So a new authority will be vested in 2023, but during this transition period that we now find ourselves in, climate change will remain a key priority for all of our local authorities, and efforts will continue to deliver against our strategies. A commitment's been made by council leaders and senior officers across the county to continue to work towards our carbon neutral objectives, ensuring that opportunities for collaboration are realised. And our partnership with Somerset West and Taunton Council is an illustration of this. So 5 minutes is very brief, but I really look forward to working with you all this morning to identify opportunities and highlight gaps where we can work together to achieve the aims of our strategies. And I'd encourage you, of course, to have a look at those strategies if you can after this morning. Thanks very much.
Christy, thank you very much. And I must say as well, express a great thanks to Sedgemoor District Council for collaborating with us on this event to deliver this opportunity to discuss COP26 and its outcomes locally. It's a great offer and provision, just to look at, as you say, I liked your words about this is an opportunity really to look at maximising where we can realise positive change. So great words there. Thank you very, very much, Christy. And we look forward to seeing you in the breakout rooms later. Could I now introduce David Ralph? So David Ralph is the Chief Executive of the Heart of the South West Local Enterprise Partnership.
Morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity, and also well done, because I think actually this is a really important discourse, and it's good to be talking about some of this, particularly myth busting some of the things that come out of COP, which is always helpful. So local enterprise partnerships face 2 ways really. One is the intergovernment, and the second is into local areas and local communities. We are part of the architecture of government, and I'm going to talk, reasonably strategically about where I think there are some gaps and where I think there's some opportunities. But one of the things I do hate is the word strategy. And I worry that we use strategies to replace action. And one of my themes would be, do we actually have a plan, or do we just have a good intent? And I think that's an important point to discuss, really. The first point I want to make, really, is that I don't think yet the Southwest is recognised by government for its contribution that it can make to achieving net zero. I will put my hand up as part of the left in this to say we haven't cut through. We haven't managed to really articulate that offer. I think we have a really outstanding offer. But in both the 10-point plan that was published a few months ago and the recent net zero strategy that Peter identified, the Southwest is rather absent from that picture. And we have got incredible assets in this area. So firstly, about energy. We could probably provide all the low carbon energy that the UK needs over the next few years, whilst other parts of the country probably use it. If you think about in Sedgemoor, we've obviously got new nuclear at Hinckley. We've got access to the Bristol Channel. In other parts of the heart of the Southwest, there's a huge amount of solar already provided. There's a real opportunity around floating offshore wind. And in the longer term, there is some real opportunities around geothermal and some of those other areas. So actually, our contribution to supplying the energy that we will need, or the low carbon energy that we will need, is really important. The second is that we have got huge assets around natural capital. And we haven't really worked out, I think Peter mentioned that we haven't really sort of worked out the impact of the agricultural economy yet and how we deliver that, but also we haven't really worked out how we can use our natural capital for carbon sequestration, how we can support both environmental targets as well as the provision of food. And I think that's something that needs further dwelling on. And then the third thing is that we have tremendous academic excellence in this part of the world. Peter is part of probably the strongest academic excellence university in terms of climate change in the country, with some absolutely leading academics. And it's probably a bit under the radar, but we need to take advantage of that. Now, there's also, we're very close to Bristol, we're very close to Bath, we're very close to Plymouth, there's all some really good stuff there. But I cannot oversell the quality of the academic excellence in this part of the world. And if you add to that places like Rothamsted Institute, and their knowledge of soils and their knowledge of how we might take forward our natural environment productively, we really need to exploit that. And I think one of the challenges for Sedgemoor is its lack of immediate access to research and higher education. And I think one of the things it needs to really think about is how it accesses some of that, which I think is a point that Peter started to make, really. The second point I wanted to make broadly is I probably don't think we have a plan for delivering net zero, either nationally or locally. We have lots of strategies. We have a bit of an energy plan that's not great, if I'm being honest. And I think probably my biggest concern here is I'm not quite sure who's responsible for it. I mean, the LEP could do it, but we've never been asked to. We have done some things which I'll come on to. I think there is some leadership going on through the county and districts, as outlined a moment ago, through their climate change emergency. And as I said, there's lots of strategies about. So I think there is a need to produce a more effective plan that people buy into and that can be delivered in order to get there. So we have things like the energy hub. It feels very incremental or iterative, some of this. And I'm not quite sure whether the energy hub is making a difference across the Southwest or whether it's making a contribution. So for example, we absolutely need to have a plan for decarbonising transport. Who's responsible for that? Not entirely sure. I think we need to have a carbon credit scheme live. I'm not quite sure who's responsible for that, although there is some funding now for the North Devon Biosphere to take it forward. So I think there is more work needed to produce a plan, and particularly who is accountable for the oversight and delivery of that plan. The third is there have been significant changes post-pandemic and post-Brexit. And I don't want to dwell on this too much, but I think we need to recognise that some of the behaviours are changing, and I'm a bit worried that we might use some of those things, for example, less travel as a success, and actually it's just different behaviours. And I think part of the challenge here is about behaviour. So the rise of digital, absolutely, that's a real opportunity, and we've got some assets in our part of the world. But how can we really use that digital piece in order to deliver net zero? People behaving differently. I think commuter patterns will be different. Somebody I noticed on the chat suggested that a lot of the transport issues relate to the A303 and the M5. I don't think with electric vehicles we're going to have less vehicles on the road. I think they may produce less carbon and maybe less other, but there will still be, as far as I can see, as many vehicles using the road. So the capacity of those roads still needs to improve. They just need to be smart roads with access to EV charging, etc. So I think that's an important contribution, but I also think we need to reduce the number of vehicle movements that we take. So I think sort of understanding, and we don't know yet, the implications of the pandemic, how that's changed things, I think is something that we need to bear in mind. And the final point I wanted to make really was about the business structure of the Southwest. So I think it is interesting. We have a very small number of primes. So who is leading this charge towards net zero? We have a very, very high number of SMEs. Now, I can't work out whether that's an asset or a weakness. Is the innovation and success we're going to see in our SMEs going to be world leading and really drive us forward, or actually does it need a small number of very large companies to say we are taking this very seriously and we're going to lead the charge? Now, I'm hoping it's the latter, because I think there is innovation in our small businesses, but then it becomes very iterative, and how we translate that across the rest of our business community, I think, is going to be difficult. So just what have we done so far? So local enterprise partnerships essentially took over the responsibility for the regional economic plan, and we fundamentally rewrote that about 2.5 years ago. So the economic plan of the last 20 years essentially been let's grow. Let's grow our economy. And actually that was causing significant challenge in terms of it was harming our environment, and also we weren't delivering to certain parts of our communities. And we changed that about 2.5 years ago, saying that we were really only going to, we think it was only worth investing in clean and inclusive growth. Now, the problem with the previous strategies, they weren't really owned by our communities. It didn't feel right for the Southwest to be growing for growth's sake. And there seems to be more buy-in to delivering clean and inclusive growth. And in most local economic plans now, there is pretty much reference to delivering clean growth as part of the outcome. We've also published, now that plan has turned into Build Back Better plan, and we're going to concentrate on delivering the transformational opportunities for the blue and green economy across that. We've also published in the last few months our blueprint for clean growth. There's too many actions in there, so we're going to concentrate on 3 or 4 specific things. And they are probably energy, how we deliver low carbon energy going forward. The second is about future flight. So how can we transition flying to be net zero? And we've got some assets around that. The third is marine, and how do we deliver clean marine and clean propulsion? And then probably the fourth is about how do we support businesses through change. And just to conclude, specifically for Sedgemoor, so with Hinkley Point so close by, the legacy for Hinkley is really important. It's not done. We were looking at fusion. We haven't been successful in securing a fusion prototype in this part of the world. But what is next for Bridgewater Bay? Is it small modular reactors? Is it hydrogen? Is it something else? So how do we absolutely take advantage of Hinkley and delivering the next step of that? The second is gravity. So gravity is a massive opportunity. And actually the delivery of it may be slightly different from what was foreseen a few years ago. but trying to maximise gravity as a centre of excellence along the M5 corridor for clean growth and inclusive growth is really, really important. Now, we are in the midst of a local development process for gravity, but that's realising that asset is really, really crucial. The third is that I think the area needs to collaborate wider, and I am slightly concerned through local government reorganisation that will become the dominant feature rather than delivery, but actually being part of a region, being part of a wider Somerset is really, really important, as well as delivering some of its own priorities. And that includes, as I said earlier, how it relates to its academic excellence, really. And then the final piece is about leadership. So there is an opportunity, because of its assets, for Sedgemoor to be really at the forefront of delivering net zero. It's got some assets that other places would long to have. And therefore it could play a really, really important role, whether it's in its towns or its industries, on how it supports both its local businesses and its local communities in delivering climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Very useful points there to pick up on, as the chance and the opportunity we have and the value we have in academics at our universities in the region. I think with University of Exeter, Peter, correct me, but there is quite a majority of University of Exeter academics in the top 20 of climate change, top 5 of climate change academic knowledge and expertise so it's very worthwhile exploring that in more detail. David also mentioned business and the innovation and opportunities business could present for our region, and that's a good lead in to our next speaker. Ruth Lambert is a development manager in Somerset and Wiltshire for the Federation of Small Businesses. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you for having me here today. Yes, so I'm Ruth Lambert and I work for the Federation of Small Businesses, looking after our members in Somerset. And for those of you that haven't heard of us before, we're the largest trade association for small businesses in the UK. And just to put that in perspective for Sedgemoor, 98% of Sedgemoor businesses have less than 50 staff and 89% have 9 staff or less. So there's an awful lot of small businesses across the district. And in fact, we have about 580 members in Sedgemoor that I look after. So I'm really pleased to be able to speak to you today. And to start off, I'd like to just talk about what FSB have been doing to get this agenda kicked off with small businesses, to try and get it on their radar. So we held a conference to tie in with COP26 for small businesses, where we had Andrew Griffiths, MP, who's involved in the net zero plan for government, come along and speak to us. We were really trying to explain to small businesses that came along what all the different terms mean, what's the difference between carbon neutral and net zero, all the different things that people sort of think, well, I don't know, it's too difficult, I'm not going to think about it. So try and clear that all up, and also to give some really great examples of businesses that were already engaging with this issue and trying to put easy solutions in place. So we were trying to sort of give people examples of what they could be doing with their business. We've also recently published a report all about accelerating progress with net zero for small businesses, and we surveyed 1,200 small businesses, and it was really interesting to see that only 60% of those that we surveyed thought that there was a climate crisis, and only 34% of small businesses had a plan in the Southwest. So I find those figures quite concerning. I worry about the 40% that don't think it's a crisis, and also those that don't think that they haven't had the headspace to think about it, putting a plan together at the moment. So what we're trying to do as an organisation is we have a sustainability hub on our website at fsb.org.uk, which tries to signpost to people what they can be doing, what resources they can be picking up on to help them engage with it. But I do think we have a big challenge ahead of us, even though I'm working hard to try and signpost local schemes as well. I noticed we've got the Southwest Manufacturing Advisory Service on and they've got a really great Make It Net Zero scheme. I've been signposting that, but it's just trying to get people to think about it. And although small businesses were included in the COP26 process, I would say that the pledges really were very high level for small business owners to engage with and think, yes, I could do that. So our challenge is to try and make it practical, make it something that they can really think, oh, I could take action with that. I could help my business. And Peter mentioned that a lot of businesses have pledged to become net zero. And I think it's about half of big businesses that have pledged to do that, but it's a very small percentage of small businesses. And really, they've just been struggling to survive through the last few years. Quite often, with COVID, they've spent their savings, they're worried about how much it's going to cost. And they're just very small teams, so they don't necessarily have the time and the resources to address to the issue. So that's something that we really need to tackle in Sedgemoor to make this a success. Something really great that came out in the budget that we've been lobbying for as an organisation was the changes to business rates. So historically, your business rates went up if you invested in your business. So if you bought something like solar panels, you'd pay more business rates. And it was really great to see that the government decided that this is no longer going to be the case. So you're not going to be penalised for making your business greener by being charged more tax. But we do need to sell the positives of action to small businesses. So we need to stress the opportunities. We need to stress the PR benefits, the marketing benefits, not only obviously the benefits to the planet, but the fact that you will stand out to your customers, you'll get more staff engagement, and you can save money by becoming greener. But I do think there are still some gaps we need to address. So a lot of small businesses that I speak to just don't know where to start. So I think we need some really clear resources on what are the things that people can do, where can they go to get those sorted out. So, if I want to change my heating, who do I speak to? Where do I go? And then importantly, what will it cost? Because most small businesses have very small budgets. We need clear guidance from government. So we need to know exactly what's expected of businesses, and we need grants and low interest loans to help people do it, because so often we know that small businesses struggle to access finance to help them do this sort of thing. We need peer support and lots of information and webinars to help people really understand. I was speaking to a small business owner the other day, and he said, I do want to do it, but I don't know what to do. So I just copy other people when I see them doing things. And I think that's something that we can grow. If we make it clear that it's easy, that there are really practical, quick things you can do your fortune, then people will pick up on it. And as an organisation, we're suggesting that the government launches a Help to Green scheme, a bit like the current Help to Grow, which is all about digital skills and leadership skills. We'd like to see one based around getting that green knowledge so that you know what to do, and accompanied by a £5,000 grant scheme to invest in your business to help you purchase those things that will help you push your business forwards. But we're also at the mercy of our suppliers. So I spoke an Indian takeaway recently, and they said, well, we'd like to stop using our plastic pots, but we can't get any at the cash and carry. We don't know where to get them. They're too expensive. So we need the bigger suppliers and the bigger businesses to be supporting the smaller businesses to improve. And I was really pleased to hear about electric vehicle charging points, because people need to be confident that if they change their fleet, they can still charge them and they can carry up. So just to conclude, I think that we need ambition, but we need a diversity of offer so that people can be confident that they can pick the solutions that are right for them, and we need a level playing field so that everyone can achieve and become net zero, no matter how big you are as a business. So thank you very much.
Ruth, that was great. Thank you very, very much for your contribution to today's discussion, and useful to understand that actually we just need some very, very simple, clear ways forward for businesses, and that would be an enormous help to them as well. And thanks for raising the SUMAS and the Growth Hubs programme. I think Tony from SUMAS is in the audience, so do drop a link in the chat to that, Tony, if you can. Could I now ask Richard Harper to join us. Richard Harper is the Head of Sustainability, Energy and Carbon for the Somerset NHS Foundation Trust and Yeovil District Hospital NHS Foundation Trust.
Thanks very much, Linda. Hello, everybody. Linda's already introduced me. I'm relatively new in post at the two trusts. We're currently going through an investigation into how we merge together. So eventually I might become an employee of just one trust. And we'll obviously, but we're looking to take our sustainability actions forward as a single organisation. At COP26, there was recognition of the impact of climate change on health. The World Health Organization presented a report on healthcare and climate change and held sessions to explain the link between climate change and the healthcare agenda. And they were looking to create recognition in countries represented at COP26 that improving sustainability through climate change mitigation, adaptation, and reversing biodiversity loss has benefits for people's health in many ways. Some of the health impacts that we can expect to see from climate change will include increased heat levels, leading to more heat-related admissions to hospital. And the question that I'm looking to try to answer is, how do our hospitals adapt to accommodate this? And actually, will our hospitals, as they are at the moment, be a source of heat stress for the patients that are going to be admitted? So how do we adapt our buildings to mitigate the impact of climate change? What systems and services do we need in place to enable that to happen? And for that to happen in a low carbon or zero carbon way. The burning of fossil fuels clearly has a link to poor air quality, and respiratory illnesses and other health conditions that result from poor air quality. We're seeing a significant increase in those at the moment. So how do we make our hospital sites a haven of good air quality? How do we provide people with an environment that helps them to improve their well-being and to get better quicker whilst they're on our sites? So we're looking to how we can try to improve air quality around our buildings. And hopefully, some of the things that we see coming out of COP26, like the electrification of vehicles, will help to reduce the instances of poor air quality. Also, reducing burning of gas and other fuels like biomass, which have a significant impact on air quality. That should be reduced as we move over to a zero carbon economy. Extreme weather events that will come from climate change, such as flooding, also cause issues and have an impact on people's mental health. The stress that comes from both flooding and the potential flooding of properties and land affects people's livelihoods, affects people's homes and their abilities to live comfortably in those environments. So we need to think about the impact that climate change is going to have on people's mental health well-being as well, and what we can do to try to fix that. Those kind of events will also put pressure on our ability to grow food locally. We saw the map earlier on that Peter shared of large swathes of Sedgemoor and Somerset potentially being underwater during flood events in 2050. How is that going to impact our agricultural economy? And how will we grow food locally that obviously has lower carbon impact than food that's grown elsewhere in the world? So hopefully some of those outcomes that we see from COP26 will help us to mitigate some of the impacts of climate change. We're looking to both strive to achieve net zero carbon. So the NHS has a target to achieve net zero carbon for our directly responsible emissions by 2040. As a trust, we're looking to put together a plan. Sorry, David, there is a plan or a strategy to help us to work towards net zero carbon. So how are we going to decarbonise our buildings, our transport and the travel miles that our staff do? How are we going to incentivise people to use active travel to get to our sites, such as walking and cycling? How are we going to impact air quality in our sites? But by far the biggest challenge is the things that we use as an organisation. the NHS uses an awful lot of things that are manufactured and imported from around the world. So how do we make that lower carbon in time, and how do we make that zero carbon within the timescales that we need to achieve the net zero carbon targets? Hopefully what we'll see is that the co-benefits of both working towards climate change mitigation, reducing carbon, reversing biodiversity loss will help us to achieve better health for everybody, at the same time as ensuring globally that the environment is protected. That's it. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you very much. That's really, really helpful to get a better picture as well about how the addressing climate change will have also an impact on local people's health. And when we look at EVs and how that improves air quality, and how you look at how people travel as well to your site, really very interesting. Thank you very much. Our final speaker today is Steve Muse. He's Local Nature Partnership Coordinator and Advocacy Manager for Somerset Wildlife Trust.
Great, thanks Linda. Right, I'll just share my screen. Only person to do a PowerPoint, I feel it's quite unusual. Great, can everyone see that okay? I can't see the people now, so I'll assume it's all good. So hello everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
That's it yet, Steve, I'm afraid.
Oh, has that come through yet?
Not yet. I'm going to try that again.
Let's try that.
Yeah, that's looking better.
Right.
Perfect.
All right, brilliant. Okay, is it still okay?
Fine, Steve, thanks.
Okay, fantastic. So yeah, COP26, what does it mean for Sedgemoor? And specifically around nature, which is the main feature of what I'll talk about today. So briefly, who am I? I'm the Local Nature Partnership Coordinator and Advocacy Manager. I think we're competing for the longest job titles today. And that's my day job. But I'm also a Somerset lad living in Wedmore in Sedgemoor. I'm also chair of Green Wedmore, which we set up in 2006. That's our community group trying to address some of the challenges that we face with climate change. I'm also chair of Wedmore Community Power Co-op with a local power solar farm we have here in Wedmore, and chair of Somerset Climate Action Network, fairly new organisation set up in 2018. So work to date, I love this image. This is a little campaign we did with the WI a few years back about loving the environment and working together on climate change, and particularly a desperately drought-ridden looking field we found in the top of the Mendips to put our love hearts up. So with Somerset Wildlife Trust, we do a lot of advocacy around the climate change field. We are effectively a small company, and we are doing a lot of work around our own carbon footprint. We've also just purchased a farm called Honeygar, where we're hoping to produce like an exemplar farming environment for lowland peat farming techniques to be able to capture carbon. And we've also been doing a lot of work around adaptation, so I'll talk about that in a bit. With a Local Nature Partnership, which is fairly newly revamped, and we haven't even got a website yet, so you won't find that in the chat, I'm afraid. But we've been tasked to deliver on some of the climate work streams of the County and District Council's climate plans, which is really exciting. So we're looking after the natural environment. We're also developing groups around nature recovery network, the green economy, food and farming, and nature and well-being. Green Wedmore, we've been working for 15 years now, doing multiple projects around energy, transport, food, well-being, carbon and nature. Wedmore Community Power Co-op, we have our little 1 megawatt solar farm in the village, which is community owned, non-profit, and will be returning about £600,000 back to the community during its life. We've got big plans as well to produce some more renewable energy in the parish as well, so look out for that. And then Somerset Can, we've been doing lots of research, engagement work, and building our network in the county with a big focus around empowerment, helping communities to take that next step to be able to take action for climate. So a rather scary cartoon I found on the web this week, a nice little COP26 cartoon just to sort of emphasize the scale of what we're facing, and really just some COP26 outcomes and focus thinking points really to take us into the workshops that we're going to have in a minute. Now, one thing that most people may not have had a chance to think about too much is how absolutely vital nature is. Everyone's heard the phrase net zero many times today, and most organizations have net zero targets. But of course, the net part of it is the remaining bit of carbon that you're not able to eliminate from your organization. And this has to be sequestered somehow. So sort of the government as well talks a lot about carbon sequestration technologies, actually actively using whatever technologies to suck carbon from the air. But of course, pretty much 100% of the carbon that's sequestered at the moment is done by nature, by our seas, by our woodlands, by our salt marshes and mudflats and all this sort of thing, which just emphasizes how unbelievably important nature is to the whole climate discussion, and how we need to protect nature and indeed restore it, because nature is in deep decline. So we're actually a focus for all the wildlife trusts and local nature partnership is to restore nature so that it can help with some of this carbon sequestering work. And so linked to that is we really need to work harder and harder to stop exploitation of carbon as quickly as possible. In Somerset, we have the rather horrible distinction of being the only county left in England that still digs peat for compost, which is really, quite frankly, horrible. We need to stop that as soon as possible. We're working closely with County Council and others to try to find a way to stop this happening, and helping the peat diggers to transition to a non-peat compost technology, because again, to dig it out emits a lot of carbon. And we're also doing a lot around protecting and restoring other natural areas which do an amazing climate job. So this is things like the salt marshes, mudflats and woodlands. The salt marshes, like we have an amazing Sturt Marshes. I think it's WWT are on the call here today, so they'll be pleased. I've given them a name check. They manage the Sturt Marshes project. And some of the work they've done recently shows the phenomenal amounts of carbon that get sequestered every year per hectare, something on the lines of 20-25 tonnes per hectare per year of carbon from salt marshes. Really, really useful bit of habitat. But to stay below 1.5 degrees, the world needs to reduce emissions by about 45% on 2010 levels by 2030. And on current progression, we're looking like we're going to be increasing by 2030. And as Peter explained really well at the start, 1.5 is not it's not great. It's still, we're having huge effects on the climate around the world at 1.1 and 1.2. So every degree, every division of degree is really, really vital. And it's just sort of emphasizing the scale of the challenge we need to make. And Peter made a really good point earlier on about the fact that behavior change is going to be key. There's no point our government saying we can carry on as normal and technology will solve everything, because we actually need to make big changes. Climate adaptation was featured more at COP26, which is really good news. And we've been doing lots of work around that in Sedgemoor and in Somerset. As you will all realise, Sedgemoor specifically, but Somerset is on the front line of climate change. We have a long coastline, we have lots of low-lying areas, we're very susceptible to flooding and sea level rise. So we started off with a project called Adaptation Pathways in Somerset about 3 or 4 years ago now, where we linked in with a major sort of infrastructure bodies and the councils and so on in the county, looking at some of the main adaptation technologies and things that we can do. And the latest project, which has been going on now for a couple of years and has got another 18 months to run, is adapting the levels. And I put a link in the chat to that as well. Happy to talk about that later. I'll be joining the adaptation working group. So tech aspects. I mean, I think one of the key things that a lot of us try to get across is that we have all the technology we need. We have no time, no need, and no money for big tech solutions now, like small modular reactors. This is just my personal view. It's all about really making the best use of nature, making the best use of the technologies we have now, because of the moves we have to make are so big. So gaps in knowledge and capacity, to my mind, I think we pretty much know enough. I think the gaps, to my mind, are in capacity, money, ambition, empowerment, authority. And we've heard a lot about the county council and district councils forming a new unitary authority soon. So things like that, can cause delays, which is frustrating. But with a Green New Deal mentality, working on the war footing which this emergency demands in Sedgemoor, there's nothing to say we can't create high-skilled jobs in conservation, ecotourism, energy saving, renewable energy, retrofit. Nothing to say we can't adapt to the locked-in climate change we will see using nature-based solutions. And we can drastically reduce our emissions, leading to cost savings and restored natural capital, such as cleaner air. And we can empower, network, and come together to tackle the climate injustice and eco-anxiety we sometimes face. Climate injustice is a key one, and that's been mentioned a few times in the chat as well. The people that are least responsible for this climate emergency are the ones that are getting hit hardest by it. So we have to make sure that everything we do has a strong climate justice direction. But that last slide really is just to show that a net zero, a carbon-free future can be incredibly positive. We're not going to live in caves and grass skirts. We can make these changes and make it positive. So that's my quick whiz through in 5 minutes, probably a bit longer. Sorry for going over time.
Steve, that's really, really useful and insight, and is perfect as we go into our next session. We're just going to go back to a couple of the panel members just to get their reflections on what we've covered today. We're drawing to a close at our event. We're just going to ask you if there's any key takeaways or things that really stood out for you in what's been shared through other presentations through the panel or the discussions in the breakout group that you were able to join. Christy, if I'm able to ask you to share your thoughts, that would be very useful. Thank you.
You'd come to me first.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Well, for me personally, it's been great to meet some new faces and to expand my network and to introduce myself, I guess, to this community. The role I'm in is a relatively new one for the local authority, so I'm not sure if our details are going to be shared, but by all means, Linda, I would be happy to share my contact details to everybody if anybody wants to get in touch. I think for me, I picked up the frustrations, I guess, that there are around access to funding to be able to enable people and communities to get on and do things locally. So I think there's definitely something there around communication and really getting the message out there about what funds might be available, and perhaps to look inwardly at us as Sedgemoor District Council and what funds we offer to communities in the same way that perhaps colleagues over in Mendip and South Somerset do. So yeah, it's been really valuable for me this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christy. And I'm very, very pleased that you're able to join us on the panel, and also thank you very much for your support and the team at Sedgemoor District Council for enabling us to put this event on today. David, could I invite you to offer some of your thoughts, please?
Yeah, so thanks again for the invitation. I was going to answer, I think I saw 3 questions that were asked of me, so I was going to answer them just very quickly. One thing that's exciting but also challenging is the diversity of this group. Lots of people doing things, but does it all come together would be one of my sort of concerns, and I guess I'm part of the responsibility in trying to make that happen, but a huge amount of things going on. So the first question was about feasibility of energy thrive. So one of the priorities will be about the LEP delivering a greater sort of join up across the patch around energy provision, how we deliver low carbon, etc. I have to do it with permission of my councils, and that's interesting because we've really got to work out what's the responsibility locally, what's the responsibility strategically, and lots of organisations have plans, but do they work together, or do they actually do slightly different things, conflicting things really? But I would hope that yes, we can have a key role in trying to produce a clearer route map to delivering net zero across the piece. The second was about impact of gravity. So it's an opportunity. I think it could be a really significant asset for the area. At the moment, it's a brownfield site that's pretty empty. Making the most of that asset over the next few years, I would just say is the priority. You know, whether that's a gigafactory, whether that's a smart campus, what that looks like, I think is important. And I think another of the themes that came out today is about social value and local supply chains. And I do think that is a post-pandemic opportunity about how we shorten supply chains. And the third is about broadband. So I would absolutely recognise that good access to digital connectivity is absolutely vital, and we're a bit behind the curve on this. The LEP has invested more in broadband than any other LEP in the country. But we're still behind the curve on this, partly because of some challenges around delivery. But I think it is really important that if we want to deliver or be able to support our businesses, and having both the digital infrastructure and the digital skills is going to be pretty important over the next 10 years. Now, government's made a universal service obligation about delivering broadband, but there is a real risk that we get left behind as an area because some of our delivery is quite complicated because of its remoteness. So I think we've got a role in all of those things. LEPs are under review at the moment, so quite what that role will look like going forward, probably need to wait and see to the new year, really.
Lovely, thank you very much, David. Richard, have you got 30 seconds we can ask you for?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's been a really interesting event. It feels like it could have we could have filled more time. You know, I suppose that there's. I mean, David said earlier on, you know, we need to be acting and not just thinking about what we're going to do, but at the same time, I think there's an awful lot of value that we can take from the different organisations that are doing things and learn from them to enable us to take things forward as quickly and as efficiently and effectively as possible. Certainly that's the case from my point of view and what we're looking to do as a organisation to work towards net zero carbon. And I just think, yeah, that hearing and understanding what other people are doing to take things forward is a really important step. So that's it.
And thank you, Richard, for offering your views as well and being part of this way forward. It's again been a very, very valuable contribution today. We're going to start to bring this event to a conclusion. We've got one final ask of you all. We're going to run a final poll just to see where this event has brought you in terms of your understanding and view of the value of COP26. Peter is going to run it. You should be able to see the poll on the screen now.
So we can see whether anything has changed in terms of how people are feeling about COP, or whether it's the same as we shared some of the outputs, some of the ways it's relevant to what's going on here. So I'll just give another few seconds for people to respond to that. Able to see the chat, see the poll, sorry. Okay, great. That's so we've had a good number of responses, so I'm just going to close that and share the results. So I'll remind you, so we now have 2 people who are feeling very positive about it, as opposed to 1 at the start. So I'll take that as a win, and no people saying they don't really know what happened. So we had 11% of people at the start saying that, and we've got still a kind of a gap, sort of a balance between cautiously optimistic and quite disappointed, but more people leaning towards neutral as well. So we definitely have seen a shift, I think, in how people are feeling about COP and how it is relevant locally. And I appreciate we have shared a lot of information. We'll share some more in the follow-up email as well. But it's really good to see that shift start to happen, because there is a lot of information to process, and it's hard to figure out which things are relevant to us. But I think this event has been a really good start for that. So I'll stop sharing that poll now.
Thank you very much. And can I just echo Peter and say thank you all for your time and your attendance today and your contributions. It's been enormously valuable. I've taken some great key points away from the conversation, not least I think that all have been expressed by our panel and in the discussions that we've been involved in, and the excellent contributions in the chats as well. not least that we do have key actors already amongst us, not only in the larger organisations, but also in the smaller businesses and the community organisations locally. And this all feels now that it's given us a view on the opportunity we have to come together and work together and share our value as well. Also, that the point about communication, I think, came out particularly in the discussions in the breakout rooms, and how important it is that we consider what we communicate and how we communicate in order to be able to take these very, very precious steps forward now and actions forward. So just to really say thank you again as well to the panel. Thank you to Christy, Strategy Manager for Climate Change at Sedgemoor District Council, to David Ralph, who joined us from the Heart of South West LEP, Ruth Lambert from the Federation of Small Businesses, Richard Harper from the NHS Foundation Trust at both Somerset and Yeovil, and Steve Muse from Somerset Wildlife Trust. Really appreciate your contributions. Thanks, and the instigators of some really valuable conversation, useful conversation in our breakout rooms as well. I hope you've all taken away some useful pointers for what you can do next. Please continue to talk with both us at Burnham and Weston Energy, with Sedgemoor District Council, with others at the University of Exeter. Make use of those academics and all of those that you will have met today. And we look to some very, very amazing actions and work to come out and continue your journeys in addressing climate change locally. Please, if you want to keep in touch, if you haven't yet done so, signed up to our mailing list when you registered on Eventbrite, please just drop us a line. You can get in touch with me at Burnham and Weston Energy. It's Linda at burnhamandwestonenergy.co.uk, and we will share your interest amongst others as well, amongst Sedgemoor District Council and the university, if that's useful. And of course, follow us on social media as well. Both the University of Exeter has a Green Futures Network, and Sedgemoor District Council as well on social media as well. Lovely. Thank you ever so much, everybody. Thank you very, very much for your time. Any final things you want to leave in the chats as you exit, please do. As Peter said, we'll be in touch following this event with a recording of the event, and we'll go through and see if there's any responses to questions or questions that remain unanswered. Otherwise, thank you very much again. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.